The body is a remarkable thing. We take it for granted until, unfortunately, people get sick, unwell, or God forbid, someone in the family becomes quite ill, and then we understand and we start to do a little research and figure out, what's going on, what's wrong, what can go wrong. It hits home sometimes, and it makes us realize we got to wake up a bit and do some research and figure out what it is that we have to do to eat healthier and take better care of our bodies and to appreciate more how they could break down. As someone once pointed out, who went to a doctor and he was complaining to the doctor as to why he was sick. The doctor says, "You're asking me why you're sick?" He said, "Ask me instead why you're not sick more often." The amount of things that can go wrong in the body, I mean, the billions of things that have to take place in the body just to allow a person to exist, let alone do all these more sophisticated activities that we do. We make a brucha, a sheyat tsar, after coming out of the bathroom to remind yourselves of all the things that can go wrong in the body and how they affect our daily lives, if they do, and try to keep our appreciation enhanced. But even still, we don't really quite understand what's going on below the surface, even on the surface of things. And it's important to recall because, as it turns out, the body itself is a microcosm of Maisa Bereshis. Actually embedded in the bodily systems that keep us functioning on a daily basis. The whole concept, what it means to be involved in Maisa Bereshis, to become a shutaf, a partner with God in the fulfillment of creation, and has a lot to say about why we go into exile, how long exile actually lasts, and why anti-Semitism seems to come at the end of them, because for some reason we seem to overstay our welcome in Galus, in exile. What does the body do? How does the body function? So one of the most basic functions that we deal with on a daily basis is digestion. For example, we take a bite of an apple, make a bracha, eat the apple, and even though the apple, it's a beautiful specimen, it's a gorgeous apple, and as far as we're concerned, we'll eat the whole thing. And the core, the pits, get rid of that, but the body of the apple, we're going to eat that because everything about it is delicious and tasty and looks nice and looks wonderful. The way Hashem made the chen embedded in the food that we eat. And the body doesn't agree. The body takes the apple and it says, okay, we've got this food in our mouth right now, and it does a little analysis, a little laboratory inside the body, analyzes the food, and says, this stuff is good, and we'll keep that, and we'll transform that into somehow into nutrients in the bloodstream and feed the body and keep it going. And this stuff, which was more like the car, it's like the carrier of all that, we will instead dispose of that. And the body's got systems for that too. The body's got systems for everything, right? So the good stuff gets separated out from the apple. It comes in as one. A separation process takes place, and the good stuff is kind of elevated, so to speak, to a whole new status, and it goes into the blood system and feeds the body. And the bad stuff gets rejected. Not exactly bad, but it's refuse. It's done its job. It's not part of what we have to eat. The question might be why Kodesh Baruch Hu made it that way in the first place. Why there's a combination of good and evil here, or good and bad in one fruit, but that's what the body does. And it's not just the body, but the breathing system, the blood system does the exact same thing. You breathe in air. It's a combination of good things and bad things, and it even makes the blood, like darkish, kind of a blue color. And the heart, takes that blood and it filters it. Separation once again. The good stuff goes and feeds the body with the oxygen, the clean oxygen. The bad stuff gets filtered out and rejected, whatever goes out through other aspects of the body. And the truth is, even intellectually, we do the same thing as well, right? We take in ideas, and it's all kinds of information that we're being bombarded with. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, some of it's relevant, some of it's irrelevant, right? What's what? What's supposed to happen? So we're equipped for that too. The mind takes in all the information, again, analyzes it. This is the good stuff. It may take a little bit more time, and it's less automatic, and perhaps more confusing, but that's what's going on. The brain is deciding this is good material. Now, you can make a mistake about that, but on a simplistic level, this is good, this is bad, take in the good, reject the bad, forget about it, maybe get stored away at some place, with all the bad ideas. Some say dreaming, part of what dreaming is all about is rejecting, getting rid of the excess information we collect during the day we don't understand necessarily. But we see one thing for sure, that there's this process of separation taking place all through the body, and we survive because of it. And there's a name for that process. Kabbalistically, that process is called birur, which means separation. The varer is to clarify something. Borer, for example, is a malach on Shabbos. There are 39 principal creative activities you cannot do on Shabbos because we learned from the Mishkan. These are the things we did to build the Mishkan. And you couldn't do these things on Shabbos. We learned from the Mishkan the 39 malachot that we're not supposed to do on Shabbos, one of which is borer. And some of them are construction and tearing and writing. These are all things we can understand as being part of the construction process. Baking even because the karbonis and things like that. But borer is unusual. To be chayiv in borer, you have to say to yourself, basically, like a beautiful bowl of apples. There's all these apples in here, and there's one bad apple that's spoiling a bunch of it. And one, let's take that apple away. Now, the truth is, someone says to you that you can't do that in Shabbos. That's called borer. You're separating the bad from the good, right? And that's not mutter, it's not permissible. So, if the guy still goes ahead and does it, he can become culpable. But without that, even accidentally, it's still called borer. Just an accidental avera. So this person, by taking one bad apple out of the group of good apples and dispensing with it specifically for the purpose of making it a better group of apples, is chayiv borer. And you think to yourself, what's that doing there? It's part of Hilchos Shabbos. Borer is like, of all the activities, it's probably the least creative activity of all of them. But it's central, because it turns out that birur and borer is essential to not only to running creation, but it was really the process that Hashem himself used to make creation. And to be able to appreciate this idea and understand how it affects the Jewish people in exile and what we're going through, we're going to have to, delve a little bit into a Kabbalistic concept called Matzotzi Kedusha, holy sparks. What are holy sparks? Holy sparks, first of all, are not physical. And they are, people have heard of them before, holy sparks, a soul is a holy spark. No question about that, right? But how much do holy sparks play a role in our life? How much do we have to pay attention to them? How much do we have to be involved with them, if at all? So, you have to first know that Maaseh Bereshis, the creation of the world, was not the beginning of the story. In fact, it was really actually the middle of the story, or well after the beginning of the story. The Zohar says that really the first two psukim of the story in creation of Bereshis bar l'kimas of Shemayim v'sa'aretz. In the beginning, God made the heaven and the earth, right? V'aretz ha'isa tova vohu v'choshech al panei tehom v'ruch Elokim merechepes al panei hamayim. The second verse talks about null and void, and there was darkness upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered above the water. And then Medrash learns out from this verse, it's alluding to the 4 exiles the Jewish people will eventually go through. That Tohu is the Babylonian exile, and Vohu is the Median exile, then comes the Choshech, the darkness, which is the Greek exile, and the face of the deep, that's the Roman exile, because it's very deep, very long. And Ruach Elokim is the Ruach of Mashiach. Merchapes al Panei Hamayim is just waiting to come at some point in time in history. So this one pasuk is the basis of all 6,000 years of Jewish history, of world history for that matter. But the Zohar says really, even though it reads nicely this way, because in the beginning God made the heavens and the earth, but they weren't yet established what they're supposed to be. Every single day, God's going to do different things. In the meantime, it's Tovavohu, Choshech al Panei Tehom. That follows perfectly. Except the Zohar says that really, chronologically speaking, because the Torah is first a book of morality and then a history book, and therefore, if history in the Chumash has to be, moved around, changed around to make the point morally, it will do that. Ein mukta mucha b'Torah is a concept that we don't have to have things follow chronologically the Chumash, and likewise, some things for the sake of better reading, they don't, on a pshat level. So the Zohar, which is Kabbalah, says that really the second verse is the first verse. And the real chronological reading of the Torah is Va'aretz ha'isa sovavohu, v'choshech al panei tehom, v'ruach Elokim merechepes al panei hamayim. That's the first verse. And then you begin with, after that, the second verse, Bereshis bar l'kimas of Shemayim v'sa'aretz, which is a big question, which is why it's not written that way. Because without Kabbalah, how can you explain it? Because it mentions that the earth was null and void, in the first verse, and we don't see creation resulting in earth until the second verse now. The first way of reading it is perfectly chronological, it just makes perfect sense. But the second way of reading it is not, because we're talking about earth before the earth was created. So therefore, Kabbalah explains, well, that's because the earth being spoken about in the second verse, which was once the first verse, is not the same earth being spoken about in the first verse, which was originally the second verse, right? They're two different earths. What are we talking about? What do we mean two different earths? Because apparently that the earth of the second verse, which was once the first verse, which we'll now call the second verse from now on in, right? That is talking about, terra firma, what we walk on, the everyday ground. But the earth of the Tohu verse is talking about the sphere of Malchus. There's 10 spheres: Keser, Chachma, Bina, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, Malchus. 10 spheres which make up the entire world in which we exist within, we live within, even beyond that world. The last one is called Malchus, and Malchus, Kabbalistically, is compared to the ground for specific reasons, and all kinds of Kabbalah that comes out of that. So really, the Tohu, the Vohu that's being spoken about in the first verse, right, is talking about the sphere of Malchus, which broke prior to Ma'aseh Bereshis. Because there's a concept called Shviras HaKelim, the breaking of the vessels, which we're not going to go into right now because it's very Kabbalistic. But just to take out a little bit of an idea that's relevant to this conversation, and that is that basically Kadosh Baruch Hu had to make a world that could support the existence of a free will being called man, which meant you have to have evil. Now, the problem with that is, if the entire creation exists inside of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, inside God, who is completely good, the concept of evil is at least an oxymoron. How do you do it? It's a paradox. It's one that we can't really resolve. It's just more like, as Israelis like to say, kacha. That's the way it is. One day, perhaps, later on in the upper stages of Olam Haba, we'll be able to understand and figure the whole thing out. But in the meantime, kacha. That's the way it is. And we learn from it instead. So it turns out, in order to make a world that can support a free will being called man, which requires evil to exist, creation first had to undergo a preliminary step of existence where it kind of pre-existed, and then it was broken, and the new Ma'aseh Bereshis was created from these broken pieces. And not just these broken pieces, because we have another problem. It's kind of the same problem expressed in a different way. And that is, we know that God, by definition, and his light, which is everything, there's nothing else but, his light is called Or Ein Sof. It's the infinite light. And the infinite in this case means the same thing everywhere that anything can possibly be, which is forever in that all directions. It's infinite. It's perfect. Nothing can be finite in this light. But we're finite, and creation's finite, and the universe is finite, and there's so much finiteness in this world that it begs the question, how does it happen? How do you have the finite existing inside the infinite? Once again, kacha. That's the way it is. That's the way Kadosh Baruch Hu made it. Not much we can do about it. That's the best way. Hashem determined that it has to be that way, and we just basically learn from it and move on. But skipping a lot of steps, that is the bulk of a lot of Kabbalah. The main thing is that Ma'aseh Bereshis was made from two elements, spiritually speaking, Kabbalistically speaking. One of them called Shivrei Kelim, broken pieces, which came from the pre-creation spheres that broke to make Ma'aseh Bereshis that could support free will. And something else called Natzotzi Kedusha. What's Natzotzi Kedusha? Holy sparks. What are holy sparks? It's divine light, but divine light's infinite. So here's the second thing. The second miracle, the second incredible miracle of creation, which again is paradoxical, an oxymoron, the whole thing, it's all these things combined together. And that is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is able to take his infinite light and package it into, it's hard to say, but finite, individualized packages of lights. That's what he did. That's a holy spark. A holy spark is an aspect of the divine light, but individualized to such an extent that I've got a soul which makes me unique, and you've got a soul that makes you unique, and he's got a soul that makes him unique, and she's got a soul that makes her unique, and this is a table, and that's a chair, and everything by definition is made up of Natzotzi Kedusha, and the individuality of all these things is because of the fact that they have individualized sparks. How does it happen? How do you get the infinite light into a finite package? Well, take a look at yourself. Your soul is an infinite light. Your body is a finite package. How does a God do it? I mean, how does it happen? It's a miracle. It's a nace, right? But the main point over here is that when the Kadosh Baruch Hu